changes in technology over the past 5 to 10 years have really made this industry blossom very, very quickly. We started out in 2011 with this guy, this Dragonfly X8, and while it looks fairly high tech, it's really kind of becoming the dinosaur of the 3 that we have on this table. It's been a great aircraft, but it's getting the older technology at this point. We've since stepped up to a Phantom 2 for this one, and that's added on a lot of different features. You can see we've got a GoPro attached to the bottom of it. So we've gone from this helicopter here, from what's basically a small version of the camera that's in the back there, the Canon 5D, which was a T2i before, to a GoPro. So we went from something about this kind of size to this size. And in doing so, we went from being able to shoot 720 to being able to shoot 4K. So, changes in GPS technology have allowed us to be a lot more accurate in our flights. We can actually set home points. We'll take off, fly out. We can actually lose the helicopter. It will actually at some point go, oh, I'm lost. You don't know where I am. I'm coming back. So it actually comes back and lands at its exact location it took off from. Pretty cool. Any questions so far, by the way? No? Okay. All right. How many, are all of you film students, video students? Yeah? Okay. Excellent. Let's see, what else is developed here? Motors and motor controllers have developed over the years. We've actually gotten to the point now we can lift extremely heavy cameras. They're actually lifting cameras that are sizes of like the ARRI Alexa film camera. That's a massive camera for a helicopter to take off. Our biggest helicopter back here can actually lift a payload of 18 pounds. It's actually considered at one point of strapping my daughter to it and flying her to the neighbor's house. Just kidding. I don't think the FAA would like that. Batteries have developed over the years. We've gone from something of this size that allows us to fly about 8 minutes with a helicopter this size, to a battery that's this size that allows us to fly the smaller helicopter for about 20 minutes, to this guy that allows us to fly for about 18 minutes with the big guy. So you can see the development in technology. One thing on these helicopters, most of these helicopters are going to be flying with what's called a lithium polymer battery. Lithium polymer batteries are known to be fairly volatile and dangerous. If anything goes wrong when you're charging it, if you damage the battery while you're flying, you now have a little miniature fire, basically. Depending on the size of the battery, it can get pretty intense. So be very careful with lithium polymer batteries. In fact, the FAA, whenever we're flying with these types of batteries on commercial aircraft, we actually have to ship these batteries separate from when we fly. They don't like us flying with these. They're actually a safety hazard. We have to ship them as hazardous materials, in fact. So keep that in mind as well. One of the big things over the past 2 to 3 years is actually integrating our drones into other productions. You're not going to do an entire video or film production on a drone. You're just not going to be able to film the entire thing with a drone. You've got to be able to have round-faced cameras to do full production. Now, if you're doing a music video, yeah, you can do that. But any kind of high-dollar production, you're going to get into, yeah, you'll use these, and that'll be an accent or B-roll kind of footage. But you've got to integrate yourself in with other groups, basically. And that's something we've been very good at doing. Another big thing, understand the capabilities and the features of your aircraft. This is one of the things that gets people in a lot of trouble with their drones. They don't understand certain features and for example, there's one guy on the forums for these particular drones that has run into some issues where he'll be in the middle of a flight and decide he wants to descend his aircraft. He'll put the throttle stick all the way down. The helicopter starts to come down, but his feature, his remote has a feature that if you go all the way down on the little thumb throttle, the entire helicopter shuts off. And then it falls out of the sky. Now all of a sudden it's in a lot of pieces. And it's a very expensive paperweight. So it's the kind of thing, he comes in and complains and informs that things aren't working properly. They're working properly, it's just he doesn't understand the features of his aircraft. Understand altitude limits. Right now, we're really pretty much limited to 400 feet by the FAA in most areas. When you get closer to airports, you want to start descending that altitude limit farther and farther down. Within 1.5 miles of a major airport, you're not supposed to be in the air at all, even if you have authorization from the airport manager to fly. A lot of these helicopters these days have that limit built into the software, so you get to 400 feet and you just stop. So it doesn't matter what you do, you can't go any higher. There's ways around it. There's older technology. I wouldn't recommend really flying higher than 400 feet. There's really no purpose because a lot of these cameras, you're going to look like you're flying at 10,000 feet with a regular helicopter, a manned aircraft. So it's dangerous. It's not where you want to be most likely. Another big no-no with these, flying near spectators or people that's not involved in your shoot. I get calls from clients all the time that want me to go out and fly like either a concert or a marathon, things like that. You're going to be flying over people's heads. Bad idea. If at any point something goes wrong, if anything goes wrong, say a motor gives out, the computer freezes up, you have a battery failure, the helicopter's coming out of the sky, and it's going to come down on whatever's below it. If someone's below it, you're probably going to get sued. The person's probably going to go to the hospital. It's not fun for anybody. So the FAA even recommends against it. I wouldn't recommend it. I've turned out a lot of gigs on that one principle. Another thing you need to do is whenever you're going to be out doing a flight, make sure you plan your flight. Go out, see the location, at least do a Google map on it. Get a satellite view, get an idea of what you're going to be flying around and near. Things you want to avoid. Power lines. You don't want a flaming helicopter, trust me. It's not pretty, it's not fun. Cell phone towers, also another thing that can cause a lot of trouble for you. Anything that's going to cause interference that gives off radio signals, whether it be a cell tower, a microwave transmitter, even power lines give off a certain amount of signal as well, that can cause an interference between your controller and the helicopter. That's a bad thing. Let's see here. Another thing you want to watch out for when you're doing your pre-flight planning, you want to check the weather. It's going to rain. What's the wind going to be? The wind is a big one. And a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of my clients don't understand that. They're basically going, well, it's 5 miles an hour of wind here on the ground, but what they don't understand is when you get to 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet, that wind can either double or triple. Just to give you an idea, 12 miles an hour, a 12 mile an hour gust of wind will take this right over, and it's done. Get up into the newer aircraft, they're a little more wind resistant, so that's good. But it's still something you got to worry about. But also keep in mind, the faster the wind, the rougher the flight's going to be. The rougher your footage is going to be. And at some point, you can't correct that footage in post-production with the stabilization program. And your footage doesn't look good, you don't look good, you're probably not going to get called back to the gig. So try to explain that to clients, try to understand that for yourself as well. It's a dangerous thing.
I am a motion graphic artist, and I am not allowed
All right. So we've talked about knowing when it's not safe to basically take off with weather conditions and things in the area. Another thing to be aware of, know when to land. That's a big one. I know it sounds simple, but a lot of people don't understand that when you get too far out or too high up, you can't retrieve that helicopter back in time before it runs out of battery. And if it runs out of battery, it's not like, well, it's going to sputter along and you'll get it back. It goes off, turns off, falls out of the sky. So it's happened quite a bit. Not today. I always try to plan ahead. And a lot of helicopters have indicators on them as far as how much battery life you have left. But just plan that in. Kind of know in your head.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
So you can program it to know when it's too far and it comes back.
Right.
But what, could you program it to say, I'm low on battery, I need to land now?
Yes. Well, I won't say that on all aircraft. All of our aircraft have a feature that basically is built in. You can say, when I get 30%, I want you to go ahead and start to warn me that I have a low battery. And then if you say 25%, just return to home and land. We actually ran into that this week on a shoot. We were in an area with a lot of wind, so we were actually draining the batteries pretty quick. That's another thing you got to remember. The higher the wind, the faster you can drain the batteries. So we got our battery warning at 30%, and coming back, we're along the coast. We're getting a lot of wind coming in all of a sudden. Coming back down the coast, all of a sudden, we get our second battery warning. Helicopter takes over on its own. It's not really paying attention to what I'm doing anymore. It's going, hey, I don't care what you say, I'm going home. I don't want to crash. So it's a nice feature to have in a lot of helicopters. Some people don't like the fact that the helicopter takes over on its own, basically almost an autopilot at that point. But it is a nice safety feature, especially when you're starting out for your first flights. These helicopters have different flight modes. And flight modes are basically how the helicopter reacts to different things. The easiest mode to fly each one of these in is GPS mode. GPS mode, basically, the helicopter will lock onto its position and say, I'm not going to move from this position unless you tell me to. So if a wind gust comes along, it'll drift off a little bit, but correct back to where it was. And I mean, we're talking down to 1.5 feet, basically. So pretty accurate. The other flight mode is called attitude mode. Attitude mode, basically, the helicopter just tries to keep level flight. So if you have a wind gust come along, it's going to just drift and drift and drift. And it doesn't matter what the GPS says, it does, it's going to keep drifting. So the nice thing about the two different modes, if you're in an area where GPS is going to go kind of in and out, if you're in kind of a wooded area a little bit, but you've got a certain amount of space for open sky, you can get somewhat of a GPS lock. You can actually have issues with the flight characteristics of the helicopter. So basically, it'll start thinking it's farther away from where it actually thinks it is if you start losing satellite lock. So if you've got open sky, stay in GPS, but if you're kind of, like indoors, you're not going to want to fly it in GPS mode. You're going to want to fly it in attitude. But then you've got to keep in your mind, this thing is going to kind of drift on you. It's not going to stay in one place, especially with wind currents, even inside. We've flown inside of stadiums that have a constant 8 to 10 mile an hour kind of wind gust going through just because they're filtering the air. So that's something else to keep in mind. Let's see. Another feature that's really kind of neat on these helicopters, especially the new ones, they have what's called intelligent orientation control.
And what that is,
basically, what the helicopter does is when it takes off, and you're in just your standard mode, you push the stick forward. Push the stick forward on this guy, it's going to go forward. You pull back, it's going to come back. You turn, you actually want to turn left, you're actually going to rotate the helicopter left that way, and then you can bank right and left this way. with this control. You get an intelligent orientation control. The different modes will allow you to take off and keep a reference to which way is forward. So basically, you can be anywhere you want to where you've taken off. If you push out, it's going to go out. So I can actually bank the helicopter, and it's going to actually keep the center point from where it took off. That's going to be where it comes back to if I pull back. No matter which way I turn the helicopter, it's going to keep that basically just going straight out, back. So if I go out, I can turn it any direction I want, but if I pull back, it's coming back to me. So it's kind of a neat thing. If you lose orientation and you're not sure where you are, you can flip it into the intelligent, they call it IOC, Intelligent Orientation Control. You can still come back. Kind of a neat feature. But I will say this. Learn to fly the aircraft in its basic term. Keep it in GPS, that way you're stabilized. But don't get into intelligent orientation control, and that way you really learn to fly the aircraft and know what you're doing. Then you can kind of rotate around, different objects and the different orientations, and you're going to be all the better pilot for it. A lot of newer aircraft allow you to flip the switch and it will automatically land the helicopter when you get it back close enough to your home point. I prefer to land it manually. I'd rather have control over it, but I've seen some good things with, control against wind and that kind of thing. So it's a nice feature. Any questions?
So this is what they see.
How much do those cost? And do you own them or does your company own them?
I own these personally. We have 4 in our fleet total. We have 2 Phantom 2s. Spec'd out the way they are, they run about $3,000 a piece. So that's a fairly fully featured helicopter. That comes with the GoPro installed. It comes with the gimbal. It comes with, of course, the helicopter, 2 batteries, charger, remote control, spare rotors, and this one also had a nice feature built into it. We have telemetry that tells us what our battery level is, our altitude, our speed, wind direction, how many satellites we're locked onto. It gives a lot of features, a lot of information and features on the screen to allow us to verify what's going on with the aircraft. Then you step up to the S1000. If you buy a completely just stripped down version, basically just the airframe, the motors, the rotors, the landing gear, all that, you're talking about $3,000 all on its own. You start getting up into this level with the camera, the gimbal, fully featured what they call ready to fly or RTF. You're talking upwards of $15,000 to $18,000. The Dragonfly X8 was actually the first one we purchased. They don't make it anymore, so there's really not a price point on it at this.
Do you put insurance on those?
Yes. That's become a very big thing in the past 2 to 3 years, is finding insurance companies, and they've gotten more and more prominent, which is really nice. When you first start out flying, I'd recommend you go ahead and become a member of what's called the AMA, and that's the Aircraft Modelers Association. Basically, you'll get a basic insurance policy on your aircraft and any liability up to a certain amount. I'm not sure exactly what that amount is, but it's pretty basic, but at least it gets you some coverage, which is great. But there are companies that are specifically insuring for these. I don't want to make any plugs or put them in. Yeah, there is insurance for these, and I highly recommend you get into it. If you get into flying these, get the insurance, because at some point you're going to crash. Hopefully, it's not on anything. So, yes, sir.
What was the name of the association?
AMA. Yeah, look up AMA and it's the Aircraft Modelers Association. Yeah. And basically, they are not only a club, but they also lobby for RC aircraft people. Any RC aircraft operators, I should say. So they're a good group to be part of. In fact, there's a conference here next week in Atlanta, not at this location, but in the Atlanta area, called AUVSI. And that is one of the bigger groups for unmanned, not just unmanned aircraft like this, but unmanned ground and unmanned underwater vehicles as well. A lot of cool stuff going to be there. So if you have the time, you're in the area, go check it out. I won't be here, unfortunately. I'm out of town on Tuesday. Did I see another question? All right.
Is on everything else all the time. So, think, we work together to solve an objective. The client comes in, the client wants to the client wants to either sell, promote, give, information.
So are they always outside in the sky? You have to fly them always outside? Or?
You don't have to always fly them outside, but you do need to understand the complications of flying inside. First of all, you're in a fixed area, so if anything goes wrong with the aircraft, you have a hard ceiling. So if anything goes wrong and you lose control of the aircraft, you're going to pop up into the ceiling, it's going to pop into the wall. Not to say it's not doable, it is. It's just a little more dangerous. You've got to plan out your flights a little bit more carefully. A lot of these aircraft also have compasses built into them. It's a great thing to have because it's feeding more data into the flight computer for it to stabilize the aircraft. However, you get in a building like this, I can almost guarantee you there's going to be a lot of metal. That throws the compass off, and that can be a big problem for you. So you either need a way to shut the compass off or reduce its sensitivity. You got a question?
We deliver the following. Everything we do is looked at and looked at and looked at again to make sure there are no.
So suppose you are flying and it crashes and ruins or damages, is there some company or something trying to fix it, or how does that work?
Generally, you're going to send it back either to the manufacturer or you're going to send it to an authorized dealer that can fix it. It's not the end of the world if you do crash it. I've had crashes. Crashed this guy twice pretty seriously. Send it back, got it repaired. It still flies. It does just fine. I've had a couple with this one as well. In fact, to bring this up, know when the aircraft is out of your control. Because at some point, if you lose control of the aircraft, and it's very possible because when you're using RF, or radio frequency to control another object, you can lose control of it. Something can either interfere with it, you can lose lock with the aircraft, or whatever object you're running with RF. I started losing control of this guy at one point during in a stadium that we have 30,000 people. And as soon as I started to lose control, I went ahead and said, at this point, this aircraft is expendable. Last thing I want to do is hurt someone, hurt a spectator. So when I figured out this thing, I have limited control at this point, I crashed it myself.
You have a certain part of the project that you're working on, you have another part of
It's not the end of the world if you crash. Probably will.
At the end of the day, it's going to be.
You can get it fixed. It's not a big
It's going to be one visual look, but you don't understand.
Which one is your favorite?
That's a good question.
You, not listening to me, have to go.
Well, as far as being relaxed and having fun, I would say the Phantom 2 is probably my favorite.
Or you don't want to go and tell him, you cause.
Probably the best flight characteristics being the S1000. It's a lot more complicated, but it has a lot more features to keep you flying and keep you flying safely. But also keep in mind the price difference between the two. It's a lot more nerve-wracking whenever you've got $3,000 in the air compared to closer to $20,000. Yes.
How severe can the weather get before you need to not fly it? Like
Define severe weather.
Precipitation.
I wouldn't recommend flying in the rain. You've got a lot of connections that are not weatherproof. Your motors are generally open to the air.
That is not your fault, that it's not where it needs to be. You don't have any experience.
And seeing this guy, whenever I rotate the motors around, you'll see the copper spindles inside the motors. those are open to the elements. You'll start to get corrosion. So if you get corrosion, you got to do some serious cleaning, or you got to do some replacements. Now, not to say you can't fly in the rain. I've seen it. I've seen people fly in the snow. Very good shots. I don't know that I would. Windage, as far as windage goes, at ground level, if wind is gusting 15 miles an hour, I'm concerned. Because not only is it starting to become a safety issue at that point, if the wind is that high, your shots are not going to be that great. So if your shots aren't going to be that great, why are you flying in the first place? Why run the risk? Why run the risk of crashing the helicopter? Why run the risk of damaging someone else's property or actually hurting someone? Other questions?
What are the top speeds like?
Top speeds? Well, it varies from aircraft to aircraft. You're talking about 20 miles an hour with this guy, closer to 30 with this guy. I don't really recommend testing the limits unless you have a specific reason. You start stressing the airframe quite a bit, you're stressing the motors. You don't want to overheat the motors either. That's another big thing. So certain aircraft are designed for that kind of thing. These are more designed for filming, so I don't know that I would do that. Not to say I haven't gone full tilt and to see how fast, not to see how fast we go, but to actually do an avoidance situation, something either comes into my airspace, whether it be a bird, another aircraft. I've actually had someone decide to fly their drone up close to mine. I was supposed to be there, but they weren't. So that's another big no-no. I don't think I can try to fly your drone around someone else's or without even talking to them first. That's another big one. Another big limiting factor that a lot of people try to break into is the altitude. How high will it go? Well, most of these will hit 8,000 feet. Do I take them to 8,000 feet? No. I was talking with a guy who got a hold of his dad's really just pin. Took it 4,400 feet and went, oh, I had 40% left on the battery. I got to bring it back now. Well, getting to 4,400 feet isn't the problem. It's getting it back because you're coming back down a lot slower than you are going up. So at about 3,800 feet, the battery went and it started falling into the sky. So where you get into altitude limits is when you're actually flying, say, like, I don't know, Denver. You get into a higher altitude. That's when you start going, well, I'm 400 feet above ground level, but what is my actual altitude, say, above sea level, ASL compared to AGL. AGL is above ground level. You want to stay under 400 feet above ground level. You want to stay, below 8,000 feet above sea level. A little bit of difference. The higher you get in the air, the thinner the air gets, which means the less lift you have, which means you're at a higher point of tolerance for your aircraft. You're not as tolerance resilient. So if something happens and you need to all of a sudden raise the aircraft up, climb altitude, bank one way or the other, you're not going to be as efficient.
And my guys are left alone. And I need to know that when I get back, ask if it's okay before you offer your advice or opinion. Do not force your views on the other. The worst thing you can do to another
If any of these have filmed like bits of a movie or something you might know of, or something, have any of these drones been connected with a movie or something we might know of?
We got called to do a Robert Redford film with this drone. It's called A Walk in the Woods. It's a North Georgia film, so that's pretty one. This is our primary helicopter for shooting a show called Monster Jam. Monster Jam is a big monster truck show with Gravedigger, Maximum Destruction, that kind of thing. We actually travel the country with this guy. We get on a lot of commercial aircraft, fly out to the venue, we'll shoot the venue. The show goes on Fox Sports 1. Generally, if we do fly, the opening shot of the show for the first 5 to 8 seconds is going to be our drone shot with that game.
Ask your friend for a solution. No offense, does not know. Doesn't know. Why? Same age as you, same experiences.
Yes.
He doesn't have anything to base it on. It's not anything about knowledge. It's the experience. We don't have anything to base it on.
Oh, how long does it take to build one or to produce one, make one? How long is that?
Well-
What's the process on that?
You don't know how this works.
You can buy helicopters already built. They're called ready to fly or RTF. You can build it and piece it together yourself if you like. Not a bad idea. You'll know all the systems and how everything's put together, but you definitely want to know what you're doing before you do it yourself. Different aircraft will cost different amounts. You can go anywhere from a home built, piecing it together yourself. You can buy just this helicopter, just the helicopter and the remote on its own for probably about $400 to $600, and then start adding on parts, whether it's the camera and gimbal, telemetry inside.
If you want to be the best,
You can really go wild with
you
it,
should have friends that are like us.
depending on how wild you want to get.
And I'm going to speed through the last one, so that's the hard one. Job being done until it's perfect. Well, if you're going to do the bare minimum.
What happens if you
you're not
lose
going to
GPS?
full extent. No.
What do you do? Like if the GPS goes off and on, then what would you do? How do you
Well,
fix that?
if you lose your GPS lock, you can do one of a couple things. You can flip it into the other mode, add it to the mode, and just fly a little more manually. Whenever we've lost GPS, it generally is an issue that we've lost half the satellites. We've flown under something, or something has flown above us, and we've lost our signal. And it comes back pretty quick. The newer helicopters actually lock on the satellite very quickly. Generally, I would say 10 to 12 seconds after we power the helicopter on, it's locked on. Other questions?
Sorry.
I think that's all our time. Thanks for listening. Appreciate you being here today.